Penguin Random House Audio presents Breach by W.L. Goodwater. Read for you by January Lavoy. 1. At a dimly lit street corner on Sebastianstrasse, a few miles south of Checkpoint Charlie and uncomfortably close to the East German border, two men in government-issue overcoats warded off the autumn cold and tried their best not to look like Americans. Or spies.
"You know, I have a lighter,"
the shorter man said. His breath steamed.
"I don't need a lighter,"
the taller man said through lips clenched around a bobbing cigarette. It was quiet, as expected. There would be more signs of life farther westward, where routine had mostly replaced rubble, but stillness usually prevailed along the border. For this evening's business, that was for the best. Overhead, a skeletal moon proved to be a disinterested accomplice, leaving the night dark even by West Berlin standards. The only other light came from the heavily curtained windows reluctantly overlooking the empty road. And, of course, from the otherworldly silver-white flicker of the wall. Its magical threads pulsed softly and steadily, like breath. The shorter man tilted back the brim of his hat. Dark curls popped out over a pale forehead.
"From where I'm standing, Jimbo, it looks like you need a lighter."
Jim frowned.
"How about you worry less about me, and more about watching for our guests, pal? But watching your little show is far more interesting."
Ignoring his companion, Jim took in a slow breath through his nose. He concentrated, murmured the words he'd been taught as best he could remember them, and snapped his fingers. The sound echoed hollowly down the quiet street. The cigarette remained unlit.
"The ladies must love this." "What would you know about ladies, Dennis?"
What was the problem? This usually worked, though he had to admit it had been a long time since he'd failed out of St. Cyprian's University of the Arcane. Dennis laughed.
"I may not have your chiseled jawline, but I do have something you clearly lack."
"And what's that, pal?"
"Self-awareness."
In the gloom behind them, the construction site they had hastily thrown together looked more like a spent battlefield. Heavy green trucks, labeled U.S. Army in a previous life, were parked at odd angles next to aged German civilian machinery. Mounds of torn-up asphalt had been piled nearby. It had been costly and a little sad to dig up a perfectly good road, especially when plenty of streets in Berlin were still pocked with the cratered reminders of the war. But everything had to look authentic. Thick canvas tarps had been erected around the most sensitive areas of the site, blocking whole sections of the glittering wall from view to dissuade their more curious neighbors. Some things might be hard to come by in West Berlin, but it never lacked for prying eyes. Snap. And again, nothing.
"See," Dennis said, "this is why I, like most hardworking Americans, don't bother with magic." "I thought that was because the examiners tested you and found you had no magical ability. Or charisma." "I don't remember them testing for charisma." "In your case, they didn't have to."
Dennis shrugged.
"Well, we can't all be as magical as you, Jimbo, can we? Do that one again, where you snap your fingers and nothing happens. I love that one."
The magic spell he was trying to cast wasn't hard. Maybe he was mispronouncing the first word. Latin had never been Jim's strongest subject. He always thought magic would be a lot simpler if he could just say the incantations in plain English. His disappointed professors hadn't been very sympathetic to this point of view. Was the accent on the first syllable or the last? He snapped his fingers again and this time was rewarded by a prickle across the back of his neck and a tiny orange ember of flame hovering in the foggy air above his hand like a benevolent spirit.
"Huh,"
Dennis said.
"Would you look at that?" "What did I tell you?"
Jim said.
"Magic."
He held up the tip of his cigarette to the floating fire and puffed his cigarette to life. He sucked in a long draw, the smooth, hot air filling his lungs. For a moment he savored the acrid taste of the smoke and sweet flavor of victory, then ducked as the flame suddenly exploded in an angry sunburst, like a journalist's flashbulb if it had been designed in hell. Dennis's eyes were wide.
Does that usually happen?
A little singed, and with the ruins of his cigarette crumbling through his fingers, Jim swore foully, first in English, then in German for good measure.
This damned city,
he said, mostly to himself.
Nothing works right here. Not even magic.
A surly voice surprised them out of the dark.
There's this concept in intelligence work you two knuckleheads might want to look up,
it said.
It's called subtlety.
Sorry, Chief, they said in unison, as Arthur joined them. He looked annoyed, but then again he always did. The head of Berlin operating base wore a scowl effortlessly, as though his face had been molded that way by a disgruntled sculptor. His brown suit, the one that seemed expertly tailored to fit poorly, was scarred with the usual unintentional creases. His tie, a stained, threadbare mistake, hung on for dear life.
They're late,
Arthur said.
Not late, Chief,
Jim said.
Just running on European time.
Arthur snorted, which could have been a laugh or a rebuke.
Just keep your eyes open and let me know when they get here,
he said.
Oh, and Jim, leave the magic to the professionals and the commies. Yes, sir. Our wayward guests are causing enough stress on my ulcer without you.
Ashad mahot nicht gerät von Moshiach,
Dennis said.
In English, Dennis, or I'll...
Arthur began. Dennis nodded toward the intersection ahead. 2 cars, glossy with accumulated mist, were coming toward them.
You Goyim would say, speak of the devil and he shall appear.
The British got out first and dutifully greeted Arthur with firm, terse handshakes. Their leader, a burly Scotsman named Alec with a dark, wild forest of a beard, had to stoop when he made his greetings. Shortly behind came the French, a smaller, more somber contingent. They spoke in low whispers with Arthur for a long minute before he led them within the tent. They gathered behind the tarps and trucks, a knot of foreigners ruling over the land they had rightly and thoroughly conquered, silent in expectation. Silent, that is, until Alec spoke.
Would you look at this lot? One well-tossed grenade over the wall, and half the brains in Western intelligence go up in smoke,
said the big Scot, who nearly filled the cramped space by himself. He shoved an elbow into Jim's ribs.
And that's just if they get me.
Alec had been a guerrilla fighter in the Highlands during the German occupation, and had the scars to prove it. Jim had always wanted to ask him about what it had been like, but Arthur had been quick to wave him off. Some things are better left where they lay, had been his advice. Some wounds don't heal right.
Forgive me,
said a thin, dark-haired man. His English was excellent, though his French accent unmistakable.
You said brains, but I believe you meant fat.
Alec's laugh nearly knocked down one of the tarps.
Emile, you didn't tell me they'd started issuing you frogs a sense of humour.
Emile was something more of a mystery. Jim had read his file, if you could call it that. A single sheet of paper, barely half filled, with the only interesting bit of intel being his preferred brand of cigarettes. His age was hard to guess, but everyone in France was a veteran of some kind or another.
Alec, ask Jim to light a cigarette for you,
Dennis added from a corner.
Enough,
Arthur said. He eyed the assembled men with the red-rimmed glare of the unwillingly sober.
It's late, I'm tired, and none of you are very fun to look at, so kindly shut up.
With all mouths closed and eyes turned toward him, Arthur grunted.
Let's get this over with so you can get back to your bosses and tell them we're not crazy.
He motioned impatiently to one of his men standing by one of the trucks.
Just very unlucky.
The agent untied a cord and pulled back the canvas sheet that had been drawn over this section of the wall. The others pressed in. It wasn't easy to see it, even when pointed out. Just a shadow, no more than an inch square, nestled in the shimmering weave that made up the wall.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?